Hey, this is Ocean K with a feature overview of Driver, a new synth for Reason. Now, Driver is a polyphonic synth that supports up to 12 voices at a time with up to 9 oscillators per voice. It's geared towards electronic music production. It's great for basses and leads, and it makes complex evolving sounds like swells and rises so much easier to make. So let's take a look. Now, almost every parameter in Driver has its own two-stage envelope associated with it. And this is the screen where we see those envelopes. Now, if we play a note, we'll see the note play through those two stages. Now, this is stage A and this is stage B. And we toggle between those stages with this toggle button. So this is A and we play a note, we see the note, and we see it go through B as well. Now, if we're playing more than one note, we'll see both of those. So here's one note and a second note. So we'll just go ahead and see all those notes, however long they play. So this is where we see all of those envelopes. This is also where we edit those envelopes. And so this is an interactive screen. So we can just edit. We're on stage A here, so we can edit the beginning of stage A and the end of stage A and the curve between them. And then we can look at stage B and we can edit the beginning and the end and the curve between them. And so this is how we actually edit curves in Driver, or edit envelopes in Driver. We set the beginning, the end, and the curve, and the beginning, the end, the curve. And there we go. There's our two-stage envelope for our oscillator volume in this case. Now, every parameter, almost every parameter in Driver has its own independent two-stage envelope. So it allows you to start creating these complex evolving sounds very, very easily by just selecting a handful of parameters and changing their envelopes over time. So let's dig into what those parameters are. Driver's sound engine is right here, and it starts with 3 sound generators. There's an oscillator sound generator, a supersaw generator, and a noise generator. Each one of these can be turned on and off, so you just turn them on with the enable button here. And so you can have 2 or 3 or one of them, it doesn't matter. Now we'll look at the oscillator generator here. The oscillator generator has a volume, a pan, and a pitch, and each one of these has its own two-stage envelope, right? So again, it's a two-stage envelope for each one of these. They're separate envelopes. Okay? There's also an Octave Selector with a 5-octave range, and then a wave selector. So we've got a sine wave, a triangle, a saw, and a pulse wave. And then if we select a pulse wave, we also have a pulse width. And again, this has its own two-stage envelope. So that envelope is independent from any of these other envelopes that we've set. So that's the oscillator. Then the supersaw, we've got also a pan and width and a pitch, just like for the oscillator, and the Octave Selector, 5-octave range. And a supersaw is it's a set of 7 saw waves playing all at the same time, but slightly detuned from each other. They're slightly out of phase. And so we have extra parameters here of width and depth. Width is how detuned those 7 saw waves are from each other, or how phased or out of phase those are. And then depth is the relative volume of those 7 saw waves. And again, width and depth, they both have their own independent two-stage envelope. So you can change the width and the depth over the duration of any note that you play just by changing its envelope. And then finally we have noise. Noise has a volume and pan just like the others, and then also a color. So you can change the noise color over time, over the duration of a note with its own two-stage envelope. So those are the 3 sound generators. Driver also has 2 independent multi-mode filters. Now, the 4 modes for each filter are low pass, high pass, band pass, and band reject. And then each filter has its own frequency cutoff and its own resonance. And each one of these has its own independent envelope. and the envelopes for these 2 frequencies and 2 resonances are separate. So they can be completely different envelopes. They're 2 entirely independent filters. Now, each one of these sound generators can be sent to filter 1 or filter 2 or both or none. So you can route these 3 generators through these 2 filters in any way you want. And then the 3 generators are combined after the filters, and that is your primary sound generator in Driver. All right. So now let's look at the master section. So we've got a master volume, of course, and then we have the duration of stage A and stage B. Now these durations can be free running or tempo synced. If they're free running, both stages can go from 0 seconds to 20 seconds. And so with both of them at their maximum, it's a 40-second envelope. And if they're tempo synced, they can go from 16 measures, full measures, to just one 1/28th note. So very long to very fast. If both stages are at their longest tempo synced, each one is 16 measures. So that's an entire note duration of 32 measures. So you can see how this becomes really great at creating rises or build-ups or drops. Whether it's over 32 measures or 16 measures or 2 measures or whatever it is, and then you can sweep the filters or sweep the color or sweep the pitch or whatever it is. It makes rises very, very easy. And then finally, we have a latch mode selector. So there are 4 latch modes. Latch modes control how the 2 stages, stage A and stage B, play together and how they respond to key presses on the keyboard or MIDI notes. So stage 1 or latch mode 1 is you play a note, and anytime you release the note stops playing. So if I just stop playing the note stops. And it doesn't matter if I'm in stage A or stage B. Whenever I lift up, it ends. Latch mode 2, let's make this a little faster. When you hold down a note, it plays through the end of stage A, but it waits. It sustains at the end of stage A until you release the note. And then it plays through stage B, right? So with a typical ADSR, it's sort of like in latch mode 2, stage A is the attack and the decay, and it sustains at the end of A. And then when you release the note, it's like a release. So that's latch mode 2. Latch mode 3 is like a one-shot. So if I just press a key and release, it's going to still play all the way through both stages. So it's like a one-shot. And then latch mode 4 is sort of a combination between modes 2 and 3, where if I just press and release, it's going to play all the way through like a one-shot. But if I press and hold until the end of stage A, it's going to sustain there until I release. And so mode 4 is actually really nice when you're playing, you'll have long notes and short notes, and Driver will be able to respond to those different types of playing. So that's our master section. Let's go over here. We've got 2 additional envelopes here. So this is envelope for CV1, and this is the envelope for CV2. Right? They're 2 independent. Now, just like all of these envelopes, they can change over time, but CV1 and CV2 aren't actually tied to any particular parameter. Instead, if you look at the back of the device, those CVs produce this CV out signal. And so this is for CV1 out and this is CV2 out. So that means you can have Driver control, just like it can control its internal parameters, it can also control external parameters. So for example, if you had another filter, a device after Driver, well, just like you can control the filter internal to Driver through this envelope, you can control a filter frequency outside of driver by setting the curve 1 to whatever the envelope you want, right, for that external filter, and then you connect CV1 out to the CV in of the filter, the frequency of that filter, right? So this is just a way of controlling external devices just like you control internal devices with these two-stage envelopes. You can, by the way, route these CV outs back in to driver with the CV ins, and I'll show you how those CV ins work in just a second. But that means that you can have these internal parameters controlled by an envelope, but you can also have them modulated by a second envelope. So you can get a little crazy there. Next, we have just a couple effects. We've got a reverb, and so this is to enable the reverb, and this is the decay of the reverb. At its minimum, there's 0 decay, so 0 reverb. At its maximum, it's its full tail of a couple seconds. And so you can just control how much reverb there is over the course of the note. And then there's a saturation. So saturation is just how is like a distortion effect, a saturation effect, whereas at its minimum it's no saturation, and at its maximum is full saturation. And so you can just create the envelope to change the saturation over the duration of the note. Next, we have these 4 items here. This is an LFO. So this LFO has 6 waveforms to it. It's got a sine, a triangle, a square, a random, a reverse ramp, and a ramp. And you can set the depth of the LFO and the rate of the LFO. And this rate can be free running or tempo synced. And so again, the depth of the LFO and the rate of the LFO have their own envelopes. So you can change the depth or the rate over the course of the note duration. And we have a little step sequencer here. This step sequencer can have from steps from 1 step to 16 steps or anything in between. And the resolution, meaning how fast each step plays, can be from an 1/8 note to a 32nd note. So in terms of step sequencers, relatively slow to relatively fast. To set a step, you just select it, right? And so everything with a light is now on for that step. And each step has, they follow a common attack and release. And you can set the attack and release here. And just like everything else, the attack and the release has its own 2-stage envelope. So you can, change the release of each step over time, over the course of the note, or change the release or both. Now, the LFO and the step sequencer, these are to modulate internal signals. And the way that you decide what you're going to modulate is you pick essentially anything that has an envelope you can modulate. So let's look at oscillator volume. Let's say we wanted to add the LFO to this. Well, there's a little button here, a toggle button, Lfo Apply Mode. And when you select this, you're given a pop-up window. And this is how much LFO do you want to apply to oscillator volume. All the way at the left, it's 0. All the way at the right, it's 100% of the LFO signal applied to oscillator volume. And of course, 50%, that's apply 50% of the LFO to the oscillator volume. Now, every single one of these parameters, anything that you can select, you can add the LFO to. So here you can add the LFO to the filter to resonance, or to the filter to frequency, or to the reverb decay, or whatever it is. You can apply this LFO to essentially any one of these parameters that has a 2-stage envelope to it. If you want to apply the step sequencer, it's the same way, although there's just a second button here, the sequencer apply mode. And this brings up, again, a little toggle, a little window that you can apply the step sequencer to anything, to your saw pan or to your oscillator pitch or whatever you want. And of course, you can apply both the LFO and the sequencer to the same things. So these two modulators, the LFO and the step sequencer, can be applied to any parameter or every parameter in driver that has an envelope. All right. So we've talked about the sound generator, we've talked about the filters, the master section, we talked about the generic CVs, the reverb, the saturation, the LFO, and the step sequencer, and then this Lfo Apply and Sequencer Apply modes. I think the only thing we haven't talked about is this little R button, which is a reset. This allows you to reset your curves to the default. So for example, if I've got my oscillator volume here, and this is what it is, but I want to reset it to its default, I can just hit reset, and it'll ask me, are you sure you want to reset? And if I select yes, it'll reset it to the default. And then I can, change it again. Now you can also use undo for this. So if I want to undo those curve changes, I can. But if I've done a bunch of work and I don't want to undo all of that, or I've done some work in between, I just want to redo, I want to reset this curve, I can go ahead and do that. So I think that's pretty much everything in the front of the device. Let's look at the back. So driver has the standard CV in, gate, and notes, so you can have a matrix or an arpeggiator control this. And then we've talked about the CV out of those generic CV envelopes. We also have 4 generic CV ins. So this allows you to bring in any signal and apply it to any one of the envelopes. So this is everything in driver that has a 2-stage envelope. And so you can select, I want a CV signal to control the oscillator volume. And so you just select that, and now anything that is connected to CV1 in is going to alter the oscillator volume. And so you can set these to, whatever you want. The only other thing on the back of driver is this high bandwidth. Now, this is to deal with sort of extraordinary aliasing. Now, by default, in driver, there's 4 times oversampling on the sound generators. So for the vast majority of sounds, this is great. This takes care of all of the aliasing. There are some occasions where you're playing really high frequency notes or notes with a lot of sweeping activity in the high end, and you might start to hear some aliasing creeping in. And so if so, you can enable high bandwidth, which ups the sound engine to 16 times oversampling. So that generally takes care of any aliasing that you'll hear in the upper registers. But of course, it also increases the DSP usage. So, my advice is to not use it when unnecessary, because it's wasted bandwidth. But if you need it, if you're hearing some aliasing and you want to get rid of that, go ahead and do that. But just know it is going to add some DSP usage. Personally, if I need it, I just enable it when I'm rendering, and just when I'm working on a song, I'll use the low bandwidth. But you can use it however you see fit. So that's driver. It is now available in the Propellerhead Rack Extension shop. I hope you check it out. Thanks.